Theater in Harlem has always been an important opportunity, an important avenue, an important activity in this community.
To be kind of in that community of creative artists and become a company, a family of artists that created production after production after production, really created the foundation for everything that I've done since.
Theatre for me was a way to have a broader conversation with as large a number of people as possible.
In a way, I was born in theater. My dad was part of the American Negro Theater, so I was always part of theater. I always knew about theater, knew there was theater, knew that we had stories to tell and they could be told on the stage.
The migration of blacks coming from the South and coming from the Caribbean into New York, blacks were beginning to feel a sense that they needed to get away from how they were being depicted, where they were depicted on legitimate stages by people in blackface that were not them. And of course, as our black actors started emerging with this sense of purpose, they started moving away out of that and creating plays for blacks by blacks.
I came to Harlem in 1933. Harlem in those days, we were more segregated than in the South. All of the better buildings had signs on them, vacancy, white only. And that forced us to put up our own grocery stores, our own drugstores. The Lois Theater, you couldn't sit on the ground floor. The balcony, all black people had to go to the balcony.
From the early 30s and even the 20s, there were theater groups, there were gatherings of people. In the early beginnings, the church played a major role. Most of our major churches had theater components. They would do what we call sacred plays, bringing the Bible to life. St. Philip's, St. Mark's Church, Abyssinian Development, they all had theater programs in its early incarnation. So you would have actors like a Paul Robeson come to those churches and perform. James Earl Jones's father was a part of that. And then that evolved into community-based theaters. An important aspect when we talk about theater in Harlem was, of course, the WPA years. President Roosevelt, right after the stock market crash, had decided that in Harlem that they would create a WPA program. It was a Works Progress Administration. It was created to find employment for people who were unemployed all over the country. In Harlem, the main initiative was to create a theater wing, and that theater wing was headed by John Houseman, and the artistic director was Orson Welles. And they created a Macbeth called the Macbeth Mikado. And in that program, they employed over 800 actors, directors, technicians, musicians, and that became a signature piece. And the play was held at the Lafayette Theater on 132nd Street and Lenox Avenue. Rose McClendon was a Broadway actress, and she was asked by the WPA program to be its first director of the theater wing. And she felt that she was not, she did not want to take on that responsibility. And so Orson Welles was then selected to become that first director. Rose McClendon went off to start her own company, and one of her starring pupils was Ossie Davis. And that was when Ossie Davis was in the Rose McClendon Players, met Ruby Dee, who was a part of the American Negro Theater, founded by Abram Hill and Frederick O'Neill.
It looked like a bumpkin, you know. It was so tall, and he just kind of looked like he spilled along, and he had this Adam's apple. He was so young with these big eyes, you know. The American Negro Theater was an incredible experience. Oh my God. With Abram Hill and Fred O'Neill, and we had classes in acting and speech and drama and fencing and reading.
The American Negro Theater was one of the first theaters to create works by blacks and then take it down to Broadway.
Once Anna Lucasta hit the boards, and we did a cross-country tour. I was in the cross-country group from the American Negro Theater, and that's how we first came into countrywide prominence. And hardly anything would be cast in film in Hollywood that we didn't know about it, or somebody in our group would be part of it.
After that, there, you know, Langston Hughes had the Suitcase Players, another theater group in the 1950s. And then the 60s came.
I came to Harlem in 1951, and for the most part, I've been living in Harlem pretty much since then. People of my generation, you know, we're the last of the Renaissance generation, had passed through certain areas of life and history that kind of transcended a lot of things that were happening and changing at that time. We grew up during the period when the music of black people began to move from one end of the dial to a more wider audience, you know. Frankie Lymon and the Teenagers and Sam Cooke were the breakthroughs. So in my time, you know, like when I spoke with young people and speak with young people, I saw Malcolm X practically on a daily basis, just as I'm looking at you. I shook Martin Luther King's hand when I was 14 years old in the Conrad Avenue Baptist Church. So I say I didn't read about those things, I kind of went through them.
Living in Harlem, a place where there is activity. When I was knee-high to a grasshopper, I'm walking the picket line. I don't know who I'd be if I didn't have my mother and grow up in Harlem. And before I knew what was happening, I knew everything. I knew about lynching. I saw people come to my mother's house in the middle of the night. I saw women in the numbers runners and the black women with the white babies.
But we would go across 125th Street and see all the prostitutes, and we would giggle and point to them, and then go and listen to the brothers talk about Africa, and then come back home. We were gone about 45, 50 minutes, period. That was Harlem. People don't want to remember that. The Harlem of a hotel, where Fidel stayed. We were outside there cheering him, saying thank you for coming to Harlem and staying up at this hotel, Hotel Teresa, right? The Harlem where these men talked about Africa, and in spite of ourselves, we heard it.
Up until I came to New York, to Harlem, I had never seen any black theater. Theater written, directed by, produced by, and featuring, black artists. From January 1964 up until he was assassinated, I was very involved with Malcolm X. I think up until that time, I had never thought of culture, in any kind of concrete way. But he was, as part of his program, it was political, economics, and culture.
Amiri Baraka moving from the village, coming up to Harlem, and kicking off what we call the Black Arts Movement.
The Lafayette, the New Heritage Theater, Roger Furman's New Heritage Theater was in full operation. The National Black Theater had just begun. You had the Ernie McClintock's Afro-American. There was just a lot of theaters around at that point.
1967, 1968, the rest of the country was being burnt down. We were all protesting back then, and theater captured the history of what was happening.
But it was like a hot kind of period, and the theater reflected that across America. This anger, this frustration was at an unbelievable high level. And so it made it possible for black theater to really flourish.
It was exhilarating. First of all, it was an opportunity to have a theater in the community, in the neighborhood, my neighborhood that I had grown up in, that would function as a theater. We could do plays and productions and create other bodies of work and things. And we didn't have to worry about trying to scratch a living. We were allowed an opportunity to do work and just to work and to get involved with our art and our culture and our history and just being there. We made that commitment to kind of like stay there and try to work it. And that was an experience that I just couldn't imagine being a part of at that time.
Theater, for me, was jumping. I mean, there was a lot going on.
The New Lafayette Theater came into fruition in 1967, and they had a body of work that really reflected this new feeling.
Oh, it was like being connected to history, because that was, even in its name, it was part of the Harlem Renaissance. And, we were in the midst, even though we didn't really necessarily think of it at that moment as such, but we were in the midst of a new renaissance in Harlem of black theaters that were like springing up all over the community. Roger Furman's New Heritage Theater, eventually Barbara Ann Tier's National Black Theater, Ernie McClintock's Afro-American Studio for Acting and Speech.
National Black Theater was started in 1968. It was founded by Barbara Ann Tier. What most people probably don't know is that Barbara was very influential in the starting of Negro Ensemble Company and their first production. And then at some point, she decided that she wanted to be uptown, and Negro Ensemble Company decided that they wanted to be downtown. So National Black Theater started at 23 East 125th Street.
Frank Silvera Writers Workshop the idea was founded by myself and actor, director Morgan Freeman. I had worked with the late, great Frank Silvera as an actor in Los Angeles in 1965. The 60s, Broadway was a very, very difficult place for people of color. We came in the 70s, and we had readings, and we had productions, and as well as classes in playwright development. And the first reading of the Frank Silvera Writers Workshop, one of those 3 Mondays, was on October 22nd in 1973, and the writer, the noted writer who facilitated and moderated that first reading was Ed Bullens. As an experienced writer, he could moderate a Q&A, a critique, and a discussion to make sure that we focus on the playwright development and not just to attack the writer, he or she, because that was very, very important.
It was a beautiful, wonderful experience, but particularly being nurtured and inspired and encouraged. And we never entertained the idea of can't do. It was always we can do, we will do, we must do. And that propelled us forward.
There was this mass movement that was emerging, that came out of that period of the 60s with the advances of the civil rights movement. And then once King's assassination occurred in '68, that was a pivotal point for all of us in terms of the level of frustration and this level of real need for change that was evolving.
So out of this anger, these riots of the 60s, these assassinations, if you will, of the leaders, Harlem became the mecca, the center for this cultural explosion. People looked to Harlem for whatever was happening in Harlem, where we can emanate that in Watts. Whatever's happening in Harlem, we can simulate that in Black Bottom, Detroit. And these programs began to flourish.
Ernie did The River Niger. I mean, Ernie's production of The River Niger was, to me, was better than the one that was done on Broadway. These people were doing the kinds of plays. Hand Is on the Gate, Ernie would do. He did a play, his first play I saw in Malcolm X was done by the 127th Street Repertory Theater.
We spent a lot of time, studying the African music and other cultural forms of expression to kind of just to really absorb the essence of that spirit, that we were trying to carry on through our work.
Sometimes, when I'm alone here in the shop, I can feel my mama's presence. So many things I never got the chance to say. Mama, I saw you raise.
Our primary mission was to, through our work, show our people who we are and where we are and what condition we are in. To express the essence of our humanity through forms that the audience could come in, our audience in Harlem could come and see themselves reflected.
And it was just so wonderful to say, we can do, plays, we can do what we like here. We can do plays relative to the history and community. And Bob had this great playwright that he had brought in from California. He's from Philly originally. Ed Bullens, who was our resident playwright.
All of this was a part of that history. Roger did a production of Rashomon, the Japanese play. And I'm telling you, man, if you did not know it, you would think those people on stage were Japanese. I mean, the way the lighting and because Roger was a technician to his soul. I mean, he knew technical theater extremely well. I saw some Long Black Block, Fat Tuesday, Midnight Friday the 13th, which was a spoof on the murder mysteries. I mean, it was in which Mario Van Peebles played the maid, and we did not know it was him until the end of the play.
All of our plays had music. One of the thoughts that we used to have said, how could black people be living in life and you don't hear music somewhere somehow? So the music oftentimes was not necessarily a part of something where somebody has a piece of business where they turn on the radio. There was just music there, whether it was an interlude in between the shifting or changing of scenes. At other times, it might even be just a little background kind of thing going on.
Roger was the absolute mess. I would walk into the Showman's Club, and he would say to me, "Oh, Lord," and he would be giving me my cue. Because this is where he had his court. He held court after rehearsal, after he painted and staged and put the sets up, and then he would have you meet at his office after hours with showmans. And he would say, "Soto," but loudly enough for me to hear him, because this is how he would direct me. This is why I'm not well, people. Yeah, this is Roger's part. And he would say, "Oh, Lord," to whoever was sitting to his right or left at the bar. But, he would say, "Oh, Lord, here come this crazy Jamaican woman. She get on my nerves." So now he was just telling me, "Phyllis, I want you to arrive at the bar like crazy woman. But I never hear something like that. My let's look up on him face. I'm say, man, you what go on? You just tell me to come here, so I don't know nothing about what to go on there. Who does the people you sit there and talk to?" And after we had thoroughly shaken the people there at the bar, he would laugh and say, "Ain't she something else? This my girl, this Phyllis, this my baby, this my killer. This my killer." You don't think in your youth about the endings of lives and things.
The last play, What If It Had Turned Up Heads by J.E. Sonny Jim Gaines. We did that with Carol Cole, Natalie Cole's sister, and Whitman Mayo, and Gary Bowling and myself. And we closed that in December of 1973.
It was definitely worth the effort and worth the fact, even in spite of the fact that after 5 years it was over. And it was a moment that we all came to accept, as, you know, this was the end. We talked about the possibility of maybe just kind of hanging on and doing anything, something to sustain, but it wouldn't have been the same. It never would have. We would never have been able to return to that level of artistry that we had.
The work was speaking to this social transition that was going on, very politically charged, and sort of aware of this other wave of gentrification that made it seem like this other thing was purposeful. Like, okay, we're going to empty these streets and empty these buildings so that these other forces can come and buy this property up for a dime on a dollar, blocks of it at a time. And then this other renaissance and gentrification that's quote unquote happening is just going to happen, but without any of you people being in our way.
I was at a Harlem Arts Alliance meeting, and it was sort of sad that two of the oldest arts organizations didn't have a space. Two of the oldest indigenous arts organizations don't have a space. And that a newer arts organization who came in through the gentrification is how they're having a space. So that's a wonderful thing on one level, but how sad on another.
We were turning our audiences on to things that we thought that they should be paying attention to, and it's always kind of been the responsibility of the artist to have that. Sometimes they're charged with that vision before anyone else, and to put that out there in another way that is unavoidable, because you can miss the news and you can kind of put the newspaper down, but when the audience is sitting there in front of you, you can't, you know, it's unavoidable. That actor's saying something, they're right there sort of in your face.
Someone told me about the new Heritage Theater and that this new play, a Cinemali, was playing uptown for a limited run, and I must go see it. There were maybe 4 people in the audience, fewer people in the audience than there were on stage. I called everybody I knew and I said, don't call me until you've gone up to the new Heritage Theater to see what they're doing.
And I wanted to be a classically trained actor because I saw a group of black actors doing Shakespeare. And I said, wow, I think I can do that. So I went to college and I learned how to do it. In my final year there, they pretty much told me, there was 2 professors who pretty much told me I could pretty much forget about a career in classical theater. And I said, not so. I just spent my $60,000. So that and other things around students who were saying, we need opportunity, we need opportunity. I said, okay, we need to form a company that would give opportunities to classically trained actors of color.
Hold on now. You avenge. All man, what does your harshness? Gone. My daughter, your mother, avenge. Creon Pandit and all he line gone. There ain't never gonna be a next Creon Pandit. You want to see you, Daddy? You want to see who spew himself into your mother at my praying and incantation, so she...
There's a generation coming through that is not receiving the level of teaching that they should. And so one of the things that that New Heritage has continued, the Roger Furman Theater has continued on in its legacy, is taking on the mentoring of young people.
Jesse Owen never stole nothing, so why does he run so fast? I mean, me too. But I'm saying no. However, I am expressing inaudible words, granted to the fact that there is truly an intelligible thought pattern that does exist somewhere, but due to the need for social acceptance and popular public opinion, well, I just find it necessary to decrease the eloquence of my expression to accommodate lower levels of aptitude.
You know, a lot of times we talk about social issues that exist, and theater and the arts can help solve a lot of the issues that exist with young people.
For incantation, I write this dream for you. I see you stand in a celestial ballroom, lit by the moon. I see you wear a gown of rose petals woven with gold thread. I see you sparkle like the necklace of stars upon your neck. I see you comfortable in shoes cut from the clouds. I see you happy with the matador in every inch of your essence, and mama, he looks like Denzel.
What it meant was to be supported through a process that enabled me to get the work out to an audience in a very safe space. So Can I Be Me was the first one, and we did that at the Museum of the City of New York. It was really just a wonderful experience. I'm a demon marketer, so I'm all about, I'm gonna bring an audience to see my work. So that really helped move people and get people interested. And I think there is an invaluable element in understanding what a writer needs in order to feel safe and put their work out in a particular space.
Somebody, I said, since I've been an adult, once wanted to be an actor, and they also write. I said, well, write something and put it on, and she did. But that's still my deepest advice.
Harlem Theater is becoming itself once again. I think that the legacy is remembering and not forgetting, and for those of us who can, reinstating, restoring what the legacy really is. On Saturday nights now I'm doing a salon, who thought? On the Parlor, like Zora and Langston. I think the legacy is surfacing even as the change is happening. I think the legacy of Harlem Theater is reemerging into something, and it's metamorphosing into something that we all prayerfully will be proud of.
If you stop and take a moment, you'll find there are many of them before you, and they were ordinary people making extraordinary changes, because they fought for what they knew to be true, and that's what made Harlem is, honoring our history, Harlem is, loving the community, keeping the memories we share every day, Harlem is, raising up a family, Harlem is, building up integrity, keeping the memories we share every day.